Yeah, I'm trying to make this as kind of informative as possible. So this is giving you a bit of an insight into kind of what we do at Knox Thomas, but also I'm kind of hoping you'll take something away from this as well. So I'm a machinery safety and compliance consultant, and there's kind of three pieces on here that hopefully, well, as kind of directors, those who run manufacturing businesses, hopefully you're already aware of some of these things, but hopefully there's a couple of things in here that might be kind of shortcuts in terms of compliance and risk assessment. So you've got two pieces of legislation which are key for machinery safety, and also if you're putting product onto the market, and that is CE marking or UKCA. UKCA is actually functionally dead. You can ask me about that later if you want. And the other is PUWER. So PUWER applies to if you're running machinery, is it safe, is it compliant, are you taking responsibility for the hazards that are presented by it and the operators you've got on your shop floor. So one of the ways to kind of shortcut your compliance with PUWER as a manufacturer is to buy CE marked machinery. But the question there is, how do you know if something is appropriate CE marked? You know, people will jump on the kind of the assumption that things from China are of poor quality. Sometimes that's true, sometimes it's not. Stuff from America is actually, I would say, worse quality and less compliant than stuff from China. But if you can incorporate into your business, or your procurement team are buying appropriately CE marked machinery, about 90% of your requirements within PUWER are kind of ticked off and done. So that means that your health and safety manager, if he's doing his PUWER assessments, he's not raising loads of non-compliances. It means that you're not going to have to hand over to engineering a load of kind of rework that he's doing with your machinery. So my recommendation there is that you need to know what you're buying in terms of your machinery, and you need to be able to kind of scrutinize that. I mean, the issue with CE marking is, unlike on the road, you know, everyone's passed a driving test. Okay, there's some sort of benchmark for safety on the road. However, you probably don't trust everyone on the road. Like, I certainly don't. But with CE marking, the issue is that there is for kind of 99% of product put on the market and machinery, there is no third-party assessment. There's nothing. So one CE mark on one machine, it could be entirely different in terms of its quality and robustness to another machine. You know, it's typically standardized across manufacturers, and if you can find reputable manufacturers, then great. But there is no scrutiny. Okay. So what is CE marking? What is UKCA? So just a quick introduction into that. So as someone who's putting machinery on the market, or if you're putting machinery into use, so you built a production line, say, you need to meet the requirements of the machinery directive, or the EMC directive, or the low voltage directive. The question is, how do you do that? What's the quickest way to kind of communicate compliance? Well, the government and the EU have very kindly given us kind of a framework for it. So what we call harmonized standards. These are standards that are specific to any one piece of machinery, and these are a benchmark for kind of quality and safety. So if you can communicate and check your compliance to those standards, you can safely kind of CE mark your machinery, and then you need to build your justification behind that. One of the other items in here is risk assessment. Now, most of us, when we think about risk assessment, you pictured a 3x3 matrix or a 5x5 matrix in your head. I used to be the engineering manager of a technology company, and every year I'd be responsible for reviewing those risk assessments. But depending on kind of what I'd eaten that morning and maybe who I was sat next to, I'd be there deliberating whether this hazard was rated as a 2 or a 3 for likelihood. And that subjectivity is really unhelpful, and can also be really costly as well. If you've got 3 or 4 people debating that around a table, then that conversation can be expensive. So what can you do? Well, if you use harmonized standards rather than kind of what do I think the level of risk is here, that provides the backbone of your risk assessment. So within what would be section 4, highlights all the hazards related to, say, conveyor belts. You know, and in that case, you'd be looking at EN 619. It'd then provide you all of the safety control measures and the appropriate mitigations for addressing those. So we can use harmonized standards as a means of benchmarking across industry. How do we know that our machines are compliant? How do we know that they're safe? So I hope that's been helpful. There might be something in there. Very happy, kind of as Luke's saying, wanting to support people in these areas. So if there are small questions, if it's just a case of Tom, in fact, I've had a couple of people on the Connects portal kind of reach out. They've been like, want to CE mark our piece of machinery. I've got a call with someone tomorrow. Someone else jumped in and was immediately like, Tom can probably help you with this. And I think in their case, I probably can't help them to a large degree, but I'm certainly going to be able to identify these are the bits of legislation that you're going to need to engage with. You're going to need to think about this. But that's the thing that actually drew me to Connect, that kind of collaborative effort, people having conversations. So I'm Tom Chaldicott. This is Knox Thomas, and I hope there was something helpful in there. Yeah.
Any questions? I mean, I've got a question. I mean,
Yeah.
how does it work? I mean,
How does it work?
Could you just go to a site and say, well, you need this?
So there's typically two customers. One is the manufacturer. So I was down in Slough the other week looking at a bakery, and they made like all the dough balls for Marks and Spencer's. They've got to comply with PUWER, but they'll typically get someone in, say myself, to look at all the hazards, look at how the thing works, check the safety functions like the e-stops and the interlocks, check that no one can kind of get their hand in anywhere kind of hazardous. So there's an assessment there. The other side is the CE marking piece, and the requirements are effectively the same, but that would be more, you're going to put this product on the market. How do you CE mark it? What are the pieces, what are the legislations that apply? And navigating them through that process. Sometimes it's just a case of going, okay, this is what applies, this is kind of how you do it, go away. I'll provide you some documentation and some framework, and you can kind of do it yourself. Or we'll come on site and we'll do kind of a gap analysis between the legislation and the standards and what you physically got, potentially help with some of the design as well. Now, we don't know your machines, but things like the requirements for guarding or the robustness and the design of safety control systems, we can provide guidance on those things and potentially do some design work where required. And then help create the technical file, so the justification for compliance. Then you get your declaration of conformity, you guys sign that, and you put the CE mark on your machine, and you can legally put it on the market. So there's kind of two pieces there.
So are there requirements in terms of renewing that? Or does that vary?
So there isn't any requirements in terms of renewing it. Within PUWER, one of the questions is, and it's an open question, how often are you going to kind of review this? Yeah. And if there are any significant changes, you definitely need to review it. And that's the same with the CE marking. So there's no specific requirement. There's no specific requirement to readdress that. But if you kind of make any corrective actions, you're going to want to check your compliance again. So
there's quite a lot of sort of self-assessment in the sense of
so
changes around what you're doing, how you're operating, that kind of thing.
So it's effectively all self-assessment.
Accountability.
Yeah. Other than, there's a couple of things. So within the machinery directive, there's things like chainsaws, refuse collection vehicles, woodworking tools, but the list isn't much longer than that. So those things do potentially, and again, there's nuance to it, potentially they need third-party assessment, but everything else is self-assessment. Yeah, which is good and bad. Yeah.
Why is UKCA dead in the water?
UKCA. So, I mean, it's been an awful lot of money wasted on this. It's a good thing that it's dead, even though it's kind of wound us up as an industry. Obviously, you've got CE marking in Europe, but one of the issues is that for a lot of things, the UK is actually a really small market. So if we move to UKCA and we don't kind of accept CE marking, there would definitely be players who would be like, well, we're just not going to sell into the UK, and we'd lose access to product. So the government, rightly so, have gone, we'll indefinitely accept CE marking within the UK. So the only reason that you would put a UKCA mark on your thing now would be for some sort of marketing purpose. It's the only reason. Everyone else is going to put CE marking because then it's easier for us to sell stuff into their EU as well. So it's completely market movement. Yeah.
So that's a given, is it?
Which?
The UK, the CE
is a given.
Yeah.
That's the way forward.
Yeah, so they've said their wordings along the lines of they've indefinitely accepted CE marking into the UK, and they've given us a guidance document which is really complicated and just a mess. But effectively, everyone who's in kind of machinery safety and compliance is just using CE marking. It saves a load of kind of terminology confusion, and we don't need the kind of barrier between us and the EU really.
Who are Knox, Thomas? Is it just you, or is it 100 people, 200 people?
Yep, entirely. So I started the business last year. There are 3 consultants, including myself. And then we've got various partners in different areas. So we've got a partner who actually supports with rectification work. So I'll come in, do the assessment, identify all non-compliances, and then we'll bring them in to kind of assess doing all the corrective actions.
They're like an engineering company.
Yeah, so they're an engineering firm. Yeah, so they're a panel builder historically, but yeah, can do kind of guarding and all the rest.
Do you offer a training service?
That's a good question. There's a couple of things that we do training in, but they're very specific. So functional safety, so control systems. We've done some training in that, and then done bits of awareness training for kind of procurement. But I often say, actually working through these things and doing it as a workshop is much better. So if someone has a piece of machinery that they want to run through the compliance process, I'd much rather they learned as we went through it, rather than doing kind of training. So yes and no to your question. Yeah.
Why the wind turbines?
Why the wind turbines? Great question. I'd rather something else, but I quite like the blue, and I like the outdoors. I have actually done certification work on wind turbines as well.
So you go from accusations of greenwashing? Because it gives you the impression you're involved in carbon production, sustainability, etc.
Fair enough.
You've got something in the background.
Well, if you've got any other suggestions for like
Not
the outdoors and machinery, then I'm totally up for that, but not the construction sector.
Because you wouldn't put oil rigs on because of the impression that gives, or you wouldn't put a coal power station on.
But it's also a very different sector. So I've actually done certification work on wind turbines.
Fair enough.
Yeah, and I'm not in process safety. So, yeah.
Right, super, thank you.
There you go. Cool.